Welcome to the audiobook of The Great Housing Hijack. This section is called 5 Housing Market Equilibria. Chapter 3, Asset Price Equilibrium, where asset prices come from. Let's start with a quote. "When I use a word," Humpty Dumpty said in a rather scornful tone, "it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less." "The question is," said Alice, "whether you can make words mean so many different things." End quote. That was from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, and could have been describing the word games that hijack the analysis of housing markets and policy today. In August 2022, an Australian news headline stated that falling prices won't fix housing affordability. Huh? People were furiously complaining that rising prices made housing more expensive and unaffordable, whatever that means. Now, apparently the opposite was true. If house price falls don't help affordability, maybe house price rises don't hinder affordability either. What on earth was going on? I've already explained how affordability is a nonsense word, but you would think people know what they mean when they say the price of housing. Here's a lesson for you. Most people don't, and most don't care what they mean. It is not useful to splash around terms like price, cost, rent, demand, and supply, with no regard to an underlying view of the economics at play. Clear statements need clear definitions. Here's one such statement. I paid a price of $500,000 for this housing property asset, and the total cost to me each month for my mortgage interest, outgoings and upkeep is about $3,000. The rent of the same home would have been $2,000 per month. This statement contains 3 concepts relating to the cost of housing, but they are distinctly different and specific. Rent is the consumer price of occupying a house for a period. Price is the sale price of a housing property asset, and cost is how much you spend on housing during a period. Each of these words now means something. In addition to being precise about what words mean at an individual level, we need a precise language to describe the economic processes and outcomes at a property system level. The price you paid to buy your housing property asset didn't come from nowhere. It was part of a system-wide outcome that depends on the actions of others, or what economists call a market equilibrium. The idea of an economic equilibrium is extremely useful and powerful. In finance, it is also known as a no arbitrage condition. For example, if it is possible to make a different choice or trade and be better off, that's what people will do, until no one is left who is clearly better off by making a different choice. Understanding the equilibrium outcomes of a property system is the key to understanding housing markets. This section is called What is an Equilibrium? A classic way of helping to understand the concept of a market equilibrium is to consider the situation of choosing from multiple queues at a supermarket checkout. If there are 2 cashiers and the queue for the first cashier is 10 people long, while the queue at the second cashier is 2 people long, then it makes sense to choose to line up at the short queue, not the long one. In fact, there is a time saving to be made by anyone from the 4th to the 10th position in the first queue shifting to the second queue. The situation of a 2-person queue next to a 10-person queue is not an equilibrium, since there are voluntary choices that people can make to improve their outcome. As each person shifts to the second queue, it increases in length. At the same time, the first queue shortens, thus reducing the time saving to the next person who switches. Ultimately, when there are 6 people in each queue, there are no gains from switching, and this becomes an equilibrium. The interaction of many people's choices to create an economic equilibrium is also the reason that changing lanes in a traffic jam doesn't seem to help you get moving faster. If one lane starts moving, some people switch lanes, slowing that lane and freeing up the other one. Because of the choices of just a few people who switch lanes, a traffic jam will sustain an equilibrium where both lanes move at the same speed on average. Back at our supermarket checkout, the queue length equilibrium can also be accompanied by an equilibrium set of prices for positions in those queues. Someone from the back of a queue could pay someone at the front to swap. The amount of money they would have to pay would be a negotiation that would make them both better off. Once all the voluntary priced position swaps have taken place, that pricing outcome is an equilibrium. It might be the case where trading to the first position is priced at $2 and the price of switching up to the second position is $1, and so on. This whole set of prices is an equilibrium. Any involuntary change from this equilibrium outcome means creating winners and losers. There are no changes any individual can make to be better off. A new regulation which changed the price of a position in the queue or forced a position swap would create a winner and a loser. For example, taking someone from the back of the queue to the front would give them a gain at the cost to others in the queue. Economic pressures generate an equilibrium in checkout queues and traffic jams, just as they do in property markets. Once a property monopoly is created, the economic incentives of property owners and residents interact in predictable ways. There are, in fact, 5 related housing market equilibria in the property system. 1. Asset prices. 2. Rental prices. 3. The spatial variation in rents and asset prices. 4. The density of new housing at a location. And 5. The rate of new housing development across a market, known as the absorption rate. These different equilibria determine different aspects of the housing market. The 5 chapters in this section describe the economics of these equilibria. Unlike most housing analysis, which pushes financially interested policy agendas and backfills a theory for why they are a good thing, we will first ensure we have a coherent theory of housing markets arising out of the property monopoly, and then use that theory to inform policy options for cheaper housing. This section is called Why Asset Prices Are Not the Economic Price of Housing. The sale price of a housing property asset is not the economic price of housing in any meaningful sense. We wouldn't say that the price of BHP shares represents the economic price of iron ore, copper, or coal. BHP shares are an asset representing ownership rights to an entity that mines and sells these minerals. Prices, in the economic sense, are the relative cost of consuming newly produced goods and services in a certain time period. The economic price of housing is therefore the rental price, which represents the market price of being housed for a certain period relative to the prices of new goods and services you must forego to consume housing instead. The rental price is what goes into consumption price indexes. It is used in national accounts to work out the gross domestic product, or GDP, as part of the measurement of new housing service production. It is what standard economic theory says is the price of housing. For clarity, from here on, I will call this price the rent or rental price to differentiate it from the concept of housing asset price or sale price. I will also use the term construction cost to mean the cost of building a home, and development cost to mean the cost of construction plus other costs required to get a home built, like engineering and architectural expenses, government fees and charges, marketing and sales costs. The sale price of a house represents the value of getting your name on the property title. It is a type of financial product, as we explored earlier. Its value comes not just from providing housing today, but from the fact that the property right lasts indefinitely and provides an ongoing profit stream from housing services. The profit stream is the value of not having to rent a home for an owner-occupier or the net rental income for a landlord. It also includes the value that comes from the flexibility to renovate or modify the dwelling, change uses, rent to other occupants, redevelop, or undertake any other legal action within the property rights bundle that can generate future cash flows. Why is it important that the sale price of a housing asset is not its economic price? Because sale prices of housing assets can rise while the economic price of occupying housing falls, or vice versa. The economic price of housing, the rent, translates into the asset sale price via other factors to generate an asset price equilibrium. Maybe you have heard that those factors are fundamentals like supply and demand. Sounds plausible, but let me translate. I don't know what factors determine price, but it must be something to do with buyers and sellers who are the ones who agree on prices. Economist Richard Dennis, in his book Econobabble, explains this way the appropriate response when someone starts using supply and demand language. Walk away when they start talking in generalities about supply and demand or market forces. Blaming the law of demand for an economic outcome is like blaming the law of gravity for a plane crash. It's proof that the speaker has no idea what they're talking about or no intention of explaining their thinking to you. That end quote from Richard. Deals between sellers, aka supply, and buyers, aka demand, set prices in all markets. But this provides as much insight as saying the person who wrote the price on the contract set the price. It doesn't explain why that price was chosen. A deeper understanding requires asking why sellers of housing hold out for a particular price and why buyers are willing to pay it. The first part of the answer requires knowing why any asset has a value, and the second part of the answer requires knowing about the equilibrium in asset markets. This section's called Why Property Assets Have Value. Like other asset markets, the value of owning property assets comes from their ability to generate future incomes. Since that income is rent, a good way to think about property asset prices is that they are the answer to the question of how much is it worth to avoid paying rent to live in this home for the infinite future as a lump sum payment today. The answer must also consider that property owners pay costs that are not paid by tenants, such as property taxes, maintenance, and building insurance. Hence, the asset price reflects the lump sum value of the net cost saving of no longer renting, which is also what a landlord buyer would receive as a net income. This was a free sample of the audiobook of The Great Housing Hijack. To get full access, sign up as a paid subscriber at fresheconomicthinking.com.